When my breath was still warming my lips in the ICU, those who once called me Mom arrived not with flowers or words of comfort, but with a notary and a stack of papers waiting for my signature. They believed I was helpless, my mind gone. They didn't know that just weeks before, I'd quietly moved my entire $11 million estate beyond their reach. What they thought would be their feast had become an empty table. My name is Margaret Lawson, and at 74 years old, I learned that the cruelest betrayals come wrapped in familiar faces. The antiseptic smell hit me first, sharp, clinical, invading my nostrils as consciousness slowly returned. My eyelids felt like lead curtains, but I forced them open to the harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU. The rhythmic beeping of monitors created a mechanical symphony that told me I was still alive, though barely. Through the haze of medication, I became aware of voices, not the gentle murmur of nurses or the professional tones of doctors, but something else entirely. Familiar voices carrying an edge I'd never heard before, calculating, cold, urgent. "She's awake," my eldest son, Richard, announced, not with relief or joy, but with the tone of a businessman spotting an opportunity. He stood at the foot of my bed in his Armani suit, every strand of his graying hair perfectly in place. Even here, in the sterile room where I fought for each breath, he looked ready for a board meeting. My daughters, Patricia and Sarah, flanked him like lieutenants. Patricia clutched her designer purse against her chest, her manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm against the leather. Sarah, my youngest at 42, at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one Louboutin heel to the other. "Mother," Richard said, moving closer. His cologne, something expensive and suffocating, mixed with the hospital air. "We're so relieved you're going to be okay. The doctors said it was touch and go for a while there." I wanted to speak, to ask how long I'd been unconscious, but my throat felt like sandpaper. A nurse had placed a cup of water with a straw on the bedside table, but none of my children moved to help me reach it. "We've been here every day," Patricia added, though the fresh salon blowout and flawless makeup suggested otherwise. "Making sure everything is taken care of. You don't need to worry about anything." That's when I saw it. The manila folder in Richard's hand, the notary standing quietly by the door like a vulture waiting for carrion. My heart monitor betrayed me with an uptick in rhythm. "Since you're awake and the doctors say you're stable," Richard continued, emphasizing the word as if it were questionable. "We thought it best to handle some important matters. Just routine paperwork. Nothing stressful." He pulled out a document, and even through my medicated fog, I could make out the words "power of attorney" at the top. Below it, another paper, something about asset management, and beneath that, what looked suspiciously like property transfer forms. "All you need to do is sign," Patricia said, producing a Mont Blanc pen from her purse as if she'd been carrying it for just this moment. "We'll handle everything else. You need to focus on getting better." I let my eyes flutter closed, buying time while my mind raced. They thought the stroke had left me helpless, perhaps even diminished. They stood there in their expensive clothes, having already divided my life's work among themselves in their minds. The house in Bellevue overlooking the bay, the investment portfolios, the art collection I'd spent decades curating, all of it reduced to signatures on a page. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should wait until she's feeling better." "She's fine," Richard cut her off with a look that could freeze blood. "Aren't you—" "Mother? The doctor said you were lucky. No significant cognitive damage." Cognitive damage, as if they were hoping for it. I kept my eyes closed, letting them think I drifted back to sleep, let them believe their mother was weak, vulnerable, ready to be plucked clean like a Thanksgiving turkey. They had no idea that 3 weeks ago, while they were planning their approach, and I knew they'd been planning, I'd seen the text messages Sarah carelessly left open on her phone during Sunday dinner. I had already moved every significant asset out of their reach. The Lawson Family Trust, established quietly with the help of my dear friend Eleanor, who ran a nonprofit foundation, now held everything. $11 million in assets, protected by an ironclad board of trustees who actually cared about my vision for the money, education funds for underprivileged youth, environmental conservation, everything my children had rolled their eyes at during holiday dinners. "We should go," Sarah suggested. "Let her rest." "Not until we get these signed," Richard insisted. "The doctor said she could have another episode at any time. We need to protect the family interests." Family interests. Not their mother's well-being, not my wishes. Family interests, code for their interests. I heard the scrape of a chair being pulled closer to my bed, felt the presence of someone leaning over me. The pen touched my hand, Richard trying to curl my fingers around it. That's when I opened my eyes fully and looked directly at him. For just a moment, I saw surprise flicker across his face before he composed himself. "Mother, you're awake. Good. We just need—" I let the pen drop from my fingers. It clattered onto the floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Then, with every ounce of strength I could muster, I shaped my lips around a single word. No. 3 weeks before my collapse, I sat in my study overlooking Puget Sound, watching the October rain create rivers on the windows. The mahogany desk before me held documents that would change everything, papers my children would never see coming. It had started with small things: Sarah's borrowed credit card that somehow never got returned, Patricia's sudden interest in my investment passwords, just in case something happens, Mother. Richard's casual questions about property deeds and account numbers. Each red flag on its own might have been dismissed, but together they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. The tipping point came during our monthly family dinner. I'd excused myself to use the powder room and returned earlier than expected to overhear their conversation in the dining room. "The Bellevue property alone is worth $4 million, Richard was saying. "Split 3 ways. That's enough to—" "We can't split anything while she's alive," Patricia interrupted, "unless she's declared incompetent." "Or signs it over willingly," Sarah added. "Maybe if we convince her she needs help managing things. She is getting older." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand gripping the wall for support. These were my children, discussing my demise like a business transaction. The son I'd helped through law school, the daughters I'd supported through failed marriages and career changes. They were carving up my life before I was even gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 3:45 a.m., I called Eleanor Hartman, my oldest friend and the director of the Hartman Foundation for Youth Education. We'd known each other since our days at the University of Washington, and if anyone could be trusted, it was Eleanor. "Margaret, what's wrong?" Her voice was alert despite the hour. "I need your help," I said, "and I need it quietly." Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor and I worked with her foundation's legal team to create something beautiful and bulletproof. The Lawson Family Trust wasn't just about keeping money from my children. It was about ensuring my legacy would actually help people, instead of funding Richard's gambling debts or Patricia's 5th divorce. We moved methodically. The Bellevue house was transferred first, followed by the investment portfolios. The art collection, including the Chihuly sculptures and Native American pieces I'd spent 30 years collecting, went into the trust with specific instructions for museum donations. Every bank account, every stock certificate, every piece of valuable property was quietly relocated beyond my children's reach. My personal attorney, James Morrison, had reservations. "Margaret, are you sure about this? Your children—" "My children are waiting for me to die," I said flatly. "Or worse, trying to speed up the process. I won't let them win." The trust board was carefully selected. Eleanor as chair, 2 professors from UW's School of Social Work, a respected environmental lawyer, and the director of the Seattle Art Museum, people with integrity, vision, and no connection to my children's sphere of influence. I kept up appearances during those weeks. Sunday dinners continued. I smiled at their feigned concern about my health, and I pretended not to notice when Richard pocketed one of my prescription bottles to research the side effects. I even acted confused occasionally, just to see the predatory gleam in their eyes. The irony was that I'd intended to leave them comfortable. if not wealthy. There were provisions in the trust for modest inheritances, enough to pay off mortgages, fund grandchildren's education, provide security without excess, but their greed had poisoned even that possibility. On the morning I collapsed, I'd just signed the final document making the trust irrevocable. The papers were barely filed when the stroke hit, a cosmic coincidence that probably saved my life. If it had happened a day earlier, before everything was finalized, my children would have gotten exactly what they wanted. Eleanor visited me in the hospital the day after my children's attempted ambush. She brought chrysanthemums from her garden and news from the outside world. "Your son has been making calls," she said quietly, pulling her chair close to my bed. "He contacted Morrison's office demanding to see your recent financial records. He was quite aggressive when told they needed your permission." I wasn't surprised. Richard had inherited his father's temper along with his hairline. "The house?" I managed to ask, my voice still raspy. "Safe. Everything's safe. The trust is airtight, Margaret. They can't touch it." She squeezed my hand, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry it came to this. Your own children—" I squeezed back, finding strength in her presence. "They made their choice. Now I've made mine." As Eleanor left, I stared out the window at the Seattle skyline, thinking about the teaching scholarships that would bear my name, the wetlands that would be preserved, the art that would inspire future generations. My children wanted my money. Instead, I'd given them something far more valuable, a lesson in consequences. The fortune they'd already spent in their minds was now as unreachable as the moon. $11 million that would change lives. Just not theirs. And somewhere in my chest, beneath the monitors and medications, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The day I was released from the hospital, the autumn air felt sharp against my skin. My neighbor, Mrs. Yamamoto, had offered to drive me home. My children were conspicuously absent, probably huddled in Richard's downtown office plotting their next move. I'd barely settled into my favorite armchair, a cup of Earl Grey steaming on the side table, when my phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "Margaret, I'm sorry to bother you so soon, but there's something you need to know." Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Richard called an emergency board meeting of the foundation. He introduced himself as your designated healthcare proxy and claimed you'd suffered severe cognitive damage." My hand tightened on the phone. "He did what?" "He stood there in his three-piece suit and told me that you were no longer capable of making decisions. He actually used the word demented. Margaret, then he presented documents claiming to be your new estate executor." "What documents?" Though I already suspected the answer. "Forgeries, most likely, or something he tricked you into signing years ago for a different purpose. Our legal team is reviewing them. But Margaret," she paused, "he knew about the trust. He knew exactly when it was established and demanded we reverse the transfers. So the vultures had been circling even earlier than I'd thought." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that the board operates independently, that the trust is irrevocable, and that his mother seemed perfectly lucid when she established it. He didn't take it well." "I could imagine." Richard's face turned an alarming shade of purple when he didn't get his way. I'd seen it during his divorce proceedings. After Eleanor hung up, I began my own documentation. I purchased a leather journal from the art supply store down the street and started recording everything: times, dates, conversations, the text messages that began flooding in. From Patricia at 2:15 p.m. "Mother, we need to talk about your recent decisions. You're clearly not thinking straight." From Sarah at 4:30 p.m. "Mom, please call me. Richard says you've done something crazy with the money. We're worried about you." From Richard at 6:42 p.m. "Your stubbornness is going to destroy this family. Call me immediately." I photographed each message, printed them, and filed them carefully. My grandfather had been a prosecutor. He'd taught me that documentation was everything. The harassment escalated quickly. Patricia appeared at my doctor's office. claiming she needed to discuss her mother's mental state with him. Dr. Patel, bless him, refused to see her without my written consent. She left in a fury, but not before the receptionist heard her mutter something about getting a court order. Sarah took a different approach. She began showing up at the house at odd hours, peering through windows, ringing the doorbell incessantly. "I just want to make sure you're okay." She'd call through the door, but I could see her trying to peer past me into the house, cataloging possessions, estimating values. The breaking point came when Mrs. Yamamoto called me at 11:20 p.m. on a Thursday night. "Margaret, I'm so sorry to wake you, but there's someone in your backyard with a flashlight. Should I call the police?" I peered through my bedroom curtains and saw a figure near the garage, the build, the way he held his shoulders. It was Richard. "Yes," I said, "call them now." The police found him trying to jimmy the lock on my garage door. He spluttered about being concerned for his mother, checking security, making sure I was safe. The officers were polite but firm, without my permission. He was trespassing. "I don't want to press charges," I told them, watching Richard's face cycle through shame, anger, and calculation. "But I do want a record of this incident." The next morning, I had security cameras installed, the locksmith changed every lock, and I established a new protocol. No one entered without my explicit invitation. My children had revealed themselves completely. The masks of concern had slipped, showing the greed beneath. They weren't even clever about it. Their desperation made them sloppy, obvious, predictable. I sat at my desk that evening, organizing my growing file of evidence. Each document was a testament to their betrayal, but also to my foresight. The trust was holding. The board was supportive. My legacy was protected. My phone buzzed with another text from Richard. "This isn't over." No. I thought, saving the screenshot to my file? It wasn't over? But he had no idea what was coming. I'd spent 74 years building my life, my fortune, my reputation. I'd survived my husband's death, built a successful business, raised 3 children who had apparently learned nothing about integrity. They thought I was weak because I was old, vulnerable because I'd been ill. They were about to learn that a mother's love could turn to steel when her children revealed themselves as parasites. I closed the file and locked it in my safe. Tomorrow, I would call Adeline Marlowe, the best estate attorney in Seattle. It was time to stop playing defense. The confrontation came on a surprisingly sunny November afternoon. I'd been expecting them. The security cameras had shown all 3 cars pulling into my driveway at 2:17 p.m. They'd coordinated, like wolves hunting in a pack. I didn't rush to the door. Instead, I finished my tea, checked that my phone was recording, and made sure the small voice recorder in my pocket was activated. By the time I opened the door, Richard had already pressed the doorbell 4 times. "Mother," he said, pushing past me without invitation. Patricia and Sarah followed, their heels clicking on my hardwood floors like countdown timers. "I don't recall inviting you in," I said calmly, leaving the door open. "We're family," Patricia said, settling onto my cream sofa as if she owned it. "We don't need invitations." Actually, with the no trespassing order from Richard's midnight adventure, they did. But I wanted to hear what they had to say. Richard remained standing, positioning himself by the fireplace like he was addressing a boardroom. In his hand was a folder. More papers, no doubt. Always papers with him. "We'll make this simple," he began. "You're going to sign these documents reversing the trust transfer, or we're going to have you declared incompetent." "On what grounds?" I asked, settling into my wingback chair. "You gave away $11 million to strangers," Patricia interjected. "That's not the action of a rational person." "I established a charitable trust with a board of respected professionals. How is that irrational?" "You cut out your own children," Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Of the 3. She'd always been the weakest link, torn between greed and the remnants of actual feeling. "I cut out nothing," I replied. "The trust has provisions for all of you, modest ones, granted, but more than you deserve after this display." Richard's face darkened. Modest provisions. We're your children. That money is our inheritance. That money is mine, I said firmly, earned through my business, my investments, my decisions, not yours. He threw the folder onto my coffee table. Papers scattered across the surface, powers of attorney, asset transfer forms, even a pre-written letter of resignation from the trust board. Sign them, he ordered. Sign them now, or I swear to God. You'll what? I stood slowly, my spine straight despite my age. Have me arrested? I have video of you breaking into my garage. Have me declared incompetent? My doctors will testify to my perfect mental clarity. Sue me? With what grounds? You were in the ICU, Patricia said. You had a stroke. You're obviously not thinking clearly. I established the trust before the stroke. I reminded them. Nice try. That's when Richard lost it. His carefully controlled facade cracked like thin ice. You selfish old bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? I have debts. From gambling, I finished. Yes. Richard, I know about the casino markers, just like I know about Patricia's third mortgage on her condo and Sarah's maxed out credit cards. You've all been living beyond your means, waiting for me to die and solve your problems. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah broke first. Mom, please, we're desperate. And whose fault is that? I asked. I paid for your educations, helped with your weddings, gave you starts in life. What you did with those advantages is on you. Patricia stood abruptly. You're going to regret this. We'll contest everything. Drag your precious trust through court. By the time we're done, your reputation will be... What? Ruined? I laughed, surprising them. I'm 74 years old. I've built my reputation over decades of actual accomplishment. You think a family squabble will destroy that? Richard gathered the unsigned papers, his hands shaking with rage. This isn't over. Yes, I said firmly. It is. I moved to the door, holding it wider. You have two choices. Leave now, peacefully, and receive the modest inheritances specified in the trust upon my death, or continue this harassment and receive nothing, absolutely nothing. You can't do that, Sarah whispered. I can and I will. The trust documents include a clause. Any beneficiary who contests the trust or harasses me forfeits their inheritance entirely. Your choice. They filed out slowly, each pausing as if to say something more. But what was left to say? They'd shown me who they really were, and I'd shown them that their mother was no fool. As Patricia passed, she hissed, I wish you died in that hospital. I know, I replied quietly. That's why you're walking away with nothing but the clothes on your back. When the last car pulled away, I closed the door and engaged the deadbolt. My hands were steady as I saved the recordings, made copies, and called Adeline Marlowe's office. Adeline, it's Margaret Lawson. I need to discuss harassment charges and a restraining order. How's your schedule tomorrow? Through my window, I watched the sun set over the bay, painting the water gold and crimson. My children had made their choice. Now I'd made mine, and unlike them, I didn't regret it for a second. Adeline Marlowe's office occupied the 32nd floor of the Columbia Center, with views that stretched from Mount Rainier to the Olympics. At 62, she was Seattle's most formidable estate attorney, known for victories that left opposing counsel questioning their career choices. Margaret, she said, rising from behind her glass desk as I entered, I've been expecting your call for weeks. You know about my situation? She smiled, a sharp expression that reminded me why her nickname in legal circles was the Velvet Hammer. Richard consulted 3 firms about challenging your mental capacity. All 3 turned him down after reviewing your medical records. Word travels. I settled into the leather chair across from her, placing my file of evidence on the desk. I need more than defensive strategies now. Adeline opened the file, her manicured fingers moving through the documents with practiced efficiency. The photographs of text messages, the police report from Richard's break-in attempt, the security footage stills, the recorded conversations. She absorbed it all without expression. This is... She paused, selecting her words. Remarkably thorough. Your grandfather trained you well. He always said, "Ow, document everything and trust no one," she finished. Judge Harold Lawson was before my time, but his reputation lingers. Now, let's discuss strategy. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing in her precise script. First, we file for restraining orders against all three. The break-in attempt alone justifies it for Richard. The harassment pattern covers Patricia and Sarah. They'll fight it. Let them. Every court appearance creates public record. Do they really want their financial desperation documented in court files? I hadn't considered that angle. What about their threat to challenge the trust? Adeline's smile widened. I've reviewed the Lawson family trust documents. Eleanor's legal team did exceptional work. It's ironclad. Any challenge would require proving you were incompetent when you created it, which is impossible given the timeline and your medical records. But they'll try anyway. Perhaps, but here's where it gets interesting. She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. Washington State has strict laws about financial elder abuse. Their attempt to force you to sign documents while you were hospitalized? That's textbook coercion. The security footage of Richard breaking in? Criminal trespass with intent to commit theft? Patricia impersonating your healthcare proxy? Fraud. My heart rate quickened. I'm suggesting we stop playing defense, file criminal complaints, force them to lawyer up for their own protection. They can't afford to challenge the trust if they're paying defense attorneys. The audacity of it took my breath away. My own children. Who wished you dead, Adeline reminded me gently, who see you as nothing more than a bank account. Margaret, I've handled family disputes for 30 years. This isn't about punishing them. It's about protecting yourself. She was right, of course. I thought of Richard's purple face, Patricia's venom, Sarah's weak protests that never quite defended me. They'd crossed every line of decency. There's more, Adeline continued. We can file civil suits for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The settlement money would go to the trust, of course, furthering your charitable goals. They don't have money. That's the whole problem. They have assets. Patricia's condo, Richard's BMW, Sarah's jewelry collection. I noticed she was wearing a Cartier watch in one of your security photos. We can place liens, force sales. The irony was delicious. They'd wanted my assets, and now they might lose their own. I need a few days to think, I said. Of course. But Margaret? Adeline's expression softened slightly. Don't wait too long. Based on these messages, they're escalating. Next time might be worse than a midnight break-in. That evening, I sat with Eleanor in my living room, sharing tea and the weight of decision. She'd brought homemade cookies, the same recipe we'd perfected in our college dormitory kitchen 50 years ago. Adeline makes strong arguments, Eleanor said after I'd explained the options. But this is about more than legal strategy. Can you live with it? Can I live without it? I countered. They won't stop. Eleanor, today it's break-ins and harassment. Tomorrow. You think they're dangerous? I thought of Richard's shaking hands, Patricia's wish that I died, Sarah's desperate pleas. Desperate people do desperate things, and they're very desperate. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then you have your answer. Protect yourself, Margaret. The foundation will support whatever you decide. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 3:12 a.m., I found myself at my desk, writing not legal documents or evidence logs, but a letter to each of my children. Not to send, they were beyond reaching, but for my own closure. To Richard, I wrote about the boy who'd once brought me dandelions, calling them sunshine flowers. When had that sweet child become a man who'd break into his mother's home? To Patricia, I remembered her fierce independence, her determination to become a surgeon before she dropped out to marry the first of her disasters. Where had that ambition gone? To Sarah, my baby. I recalled her tears when our cat died, her gentle heart that couldn't bear suffering. How had she let her siblings poison that sweetness? By dawn, I'd made my decision. I sealed the letters in my safe. Perhaps someday, years from now, they'd read them and understand. Or perhaps not. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called Adeline. File everything, I said. Criminal complaints, civil suits, restraining orders, everything. You're certain? I looked out at the bay, where morning light danced on the waves, somewhere out there. The future recipients of the Lawson Family Trust scholarships were waking up to possibilities my money would create. That was my true legacy. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The restraining orders were served on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my children had regrouped and launched their counteroffensive. The doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m. Through the security monitor, I saw a King County Sheriff's deputy standing beside a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, clutching a clipboard. "Mrs. Lawson?" the deputy asked when I opened the door. "This gentleman is from Adult Protective Services. They've received a report of a vulnerable adult in danger." The social worker, his badge read Timothy Pearson, cleared his throat. "We've had concerns raised about your welfare. Ma'am, your children filed an emergency petition claiming you're being unduly influenced and isolated from family." I almost laughed. Instead, I invited them in, served coffee, and calmly presented my documentation. "Mr." Pearson's eyes widened as he reviewed the police reports, the security footage stills, the text messages. "They told me you were paranoid and delusional," he said slowly, "that you'd given away your fortune to strangers because someone was manipulating you." "The only manipulation here is theirs," I replied. "Would you like to see the trust documents, meet with my board of trustees, speak with my physicians?" 2 hours later, Mr. Pearson left with a very different picture than he'd arrived with. The deputy lingered at the door. "Ma'am, I've seen this before," he said quietly. "Family members who think inheritance is their right. You might want to consider additional security measures." That afternoon, Adeline called with an update. "Your children have hired Marcus Whitman." I knew the name, Seattle's most aggressive family law attorney, famous for brutal tactics and questionable ethics. "He's filed an emergency competency hearing," she continued, "claiming immediate intervention is necessary to prevent further dissipation of assets. The hearing is Monday." 4 days. They were moving fast, desperately. "He's also filed a civil suit," Adeline added, "claiming breach of fiduciary duty, undue influence by the trust board, and elderly financial abuse by Eleanor Hartman specifically." Eleanor! My blood chilled. They were attacking my friend to get to me. "Don't worry. Eleanor's lawyers are already on it. But Margaret, this is war now. They're throwing everything at the wall." War. My own children had declared war. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Depositions, medical evaluations, strategy sessions, doctor. Patel conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment, concluding I was remarkably sharp for any age, let alone 74. 2 psychiatrists confirmed no signs of dementia, depression, or undue influence. Eleanor, bless her, was undaunted by the accusations. 50 years of friendship, she said over dinner Saturday night. They think a frivolous lawsuit will scare me off? They don't know who they're dealing with. Sunday evening, I stood in my closet, selecting clothes for court, not the soft cardigans and comfortable slacks I'd worn since retirement, but the armor of my business days. A charcoal suit, crisp white blouse, the pearl necklace my husband had given me for our 25th anniversary. If they wanted to see the woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing, they'd see her. Marcus Whitman lived up to his reputation. He arrived at the courthouse Monday morning like a storm system, all bluster and intimidation. My children flanked him, dressed in calculated vulnerability. Sarah in a demure dress that made her look younger. Patricia with subtle makeup suggesting sleepless nights. Richard in a conservative suit that hid his gambling desperation. They'd even brought props, photographs of happier times, family Christmases, graduations, vacations, as if posed pictures could erase attempted theft and wished for death. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate. Judge Catherine Wells presided, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The gallery held a few reporters. Adeline had warned me they might come. Prominent family, significant money, elderly parent, it's catnip for the press. Whitman opened with theatrical concern. Your Honor, we're here because 3 adult children are watching their beloved mother destroy her legacy and potentially her life, Mrs. Lawson, while in obvious cognitive decline, has given away $11 million to virtual strangers. He painted a picture of a confused old woman, manipulated by greedy outsiders, abandoning her loving family. Sarah actually produced tears on cue. I watched it all with detached fascination, like observing a play where I knew every line was false. Adeline's response was surgical. She presented the timeline, trust established before any medical event. She introduced evidence of harassment, break-ins, coercion. She played audio of Patricia saying she wished I'd died. The judge's expression never changed, but I saw her taking notes. Then came the witnesses. Doctor. Patel testified to my mental clarity. The psychiatrist confirmed no cognitive impairment. Eleanor spoke about the trust's mission, the careful planning, my full participation in every decision. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. My grandson, David, Richard's eldest son. My dad's been planning this for years, he said, his voice steady despite Richard's furious glare. He used to joke about spending Grandma's money, said it was his retirement plan. The courtroom erupted. Richard jumped up, shouting at his son. Whitman tried to object. Judge Wells banged her gavel, threatening contempt charges. When order was restored, David continued, I have emails, group texts with my dad and aunts. They called it Operation Inheritance, like it was some kind of game. He produced printed copies. Whitman's face went pale as he read them. My children had been careless, discussing their plans in writing, never imagining one of their own would betray them. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked her nephew, genuine bewilderment in her voice. Because Grandma doesn't deserve this, David replied simply, and neither do the kids who'll get scholarships from her trust. You're trying to steal from charity. How do you live with that? I hadn't known David had overheard their planning. I hadn't known he cared. In that moment, I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps the next generation wasn't lost after all. Judge Wells called for a recess after David's testimony. In the hallway, I watched my family fracture completely. Richard grabbed his son's arm, hissing threats about cutting him off, while Patricia shrieked about family loyalty. Sarah stood apart, looking lost, as if she'd just realized the magnitude of what they'd done. Don't touch me, David said firmly, shaking off his father's grip. I'm done being part of this poison. He found me by the water fountain. Grandma, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I kept thinking they'd come to their senses. You spoke up when it mattered, I told him. That took courage. When court reconvened, Whitman tried damage control, but the emails had shattered his narrative. How could he claim I was being manipulated when evidence showed my children had been planning their scheme for years? Then it was my turn to testify. I rose slowly, not from frailty, but for effect. Let them see the deliberation in every movement. I walked to the witness stand with my spine straight, my head high. Mrs. Lawson, Adeline began, can you tell the court about your decision to establish the trust? I looked directly at my children as I spoke. I spent 50 years building my business. I worked 18-hour days, missed school plays, sacrificed time with my family to create something lasting. I always intended to leave a legacy, not just money, but meaning. And your children? I raised them with every advantage: private schools, college tuition, help with homes and marriages and divorces. I gave them everything except, apparently, the values I tried to instill. Richard's jaw clenched. Patricia looked away. Sarah wiped at her eyes. The breaking point, I continued, came when I overheard them discussing my death like a business opportunity. They weren't concerned about losing their mother. They were calculating property values and portfolio splits. Objection, Whitman called out. Hearsay. Overruled, Judge Wells said curtly. The witness is testifying to her own experience and state of mind. I described the weeks of planning, the careful establishment of the trust, the selection of board members. I explained the charitable mission, scholarships for first-generation college students, environmental protection, arts education. My children would have received generous inheritances, I said, until they tried to steal everything while I lay in a hospital bed. Whitman's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned my memory, my judgment, my relationship with Eleanor. He implied romantic entanglement, financial kickbacks, mental deterioration. I answered each attack calmly. My grandfather's training serving me well. Never lose your temper on the stand. Never volunteer information. Answer only what's asked. Isn't it true you've cut your children out purely from spite? He finally asked, frustration creeping into his voice. No, I replied. I've redirected my assets from those who see me as a walking ATM to causes that will actually make a difference. If that's spite, then I'm guilty. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Judge Wells asked to see the original trust documents, particularly the provisions for my children. Mr. Whitman, she said after reviewing them, are you aware that your clients would each receive $250,000 under the current trust provisions? Whitman's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Behind him, Richard's face went ashen. Your clients didn't mention this? The judge continued. They're not disinherited at all. They're challenging a trust that already provides them substantial inheritances because they want more. Your Honor, the amount isn't the issue. Isn't it? Judge Wells' voice could have frozen water, because from where I sit, it looks like 3 adult children with existing trust benefits are trying to overturn their mother's charitable giving to grab millions more. She turned to me. Mrs. Lawson, do these provisions still stand? This was my moment. I could be magnanimous, forgive their greed, maintain the inheritances. Every eye in the courtroom was on me. No, Your Honor, I said clearly. The trust contains a no-contest clause. By bringing this action, they forfeited their inheritances entirely. The eruption was immediate, Sarah sobbed. Patricia shouted something about vindictive bitches. Richard simply stared, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. Judge Wells gavelled for order. I've heard enough. The court finds no evidence of diminished capacity, undue influence, or any grounds to overturn the Lawson Family Trust. The petition is denied. She paused, her gaze settling on my children. I also find sufficient evidence of harassment and attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I'm referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for criminal investigation. Another pause. Furthermore, given the evidence of ongoing harassment and the break-in attempt, I'm granting immediate restraining orders. The respondents, Richard, Patricia, and Sarah Lawson, are to have no contact with Margaret Lawson for 1 year. The gavel came down with finality. I sat for a moment, absorbing the victory. Around me, chaos reigned. Whitman was trying to calm my children. Reporters were scribbling notes. The bailiff was moving to ensure compliance with the restraining orders. But I felt only peace. It was over. I stood, gathered my purse, and walked toward the exit. As I passed my children, Sarah reached out as if to touch me. The bailiff stepped between us. "Mom, please," she whispered. I looked at her, my baby, my youngest, now a middle-aged woman who'd chosen greed over love. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said simply, and walked out of their lives forever. The drive home from the courthouse felt like emerging from a storm into sudden stillness. Mrs. Yamamoto had left a casserole on my porch with a note. Saw the news, so proud of you. Dinner's handled. Inside my house, I moved through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes. The photographs on the mantel, family vacations, holiday gatherings, birthday parties, felt like artifacts from another life. I didn't remove them. They were reminders of what had been, and more importantly, of what I'd survived. Eleanor arrived at 6 p.m. with champagne. Dom Perignon, she announced. I've been saving it for a special occasion. We sat on my deck, watching the sun paint the bay in shades of amber and rose. The champagne was perfect, crisp, celebratory, but with a complexity that spoke of time and patience. "Any regrets?" Eleanor asked. I considered the question. About the trust? Never. About my children? I sighed. I regret who they became, not what I did about it. Over the following days, the aftermath unfolded predictably. Richard's gambling debts came due without his expected windfall. He declared bankruptcy within 3 months. Patricia's third husband left her when he realized the loss in millions weren't coming. She moved to a studio apartment in Tacoma. Sarah, surprisingly, found work as a receptionist at a dental office. Of the 3, she alone sent a letter, not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging what she'd done. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. The trust flourished. Within 6 months, we'd funded full scholarships for 12 first-generation college students. The Environmental Fund purchased crucial wetlands for preservation. The arts program brought music education to 3 underserved schools. I attended the first scholarship ceremony in December. A young woman named Maria Torres stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face as she thanked the Lawson Trust for making her dream of becoming a doctor possible. "I'm the first in my family to attend college," she said. "This scholarship isn't just changing my life, it's changing my family's future." That was legacy, not names on documents or money in accounts, but futures transformed, possibilities created. David visited regularly, bringing his children, my great-grandchildren who still saw me as grandma, not a bank account. He'd started law school, inspired, he said, by watching justice prevail in that courtroom. "I want to help people protect themselves," he told me, "the way Adeline protected you." 1 year after the trial, on a crisp spring morning, I sat at my desk writing in the same journal where I'd once documented my children's betrayal. But now I wrote different words. Today, Maria Torres called. She passed her MCATs with flying scores. James Patterson, another scholarship recipient, just got accepted to grad school for environmental engineering. The wetlands we saved are now home to a recovered heron population. My children thought my money was their inheritance. They were wrong. These lives changed, this habitat preserved, this beauty created. This is inheritance, not just mine, but the world's. I closed the journal and walked to my window. The bay sparkled in morning light, ferries crossing like determined beetles, the city humming with life and possibility. Somewhere out there, young people were attending classes my money made possible. Artists were creating beauty my funds supported. Nature was thriving in spaces my trust protected. The doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I saw a delivery driver with a small package. The return address made me pause. Sarah's apartment. Inside was a single item, a ceramic mug, clumsily handmade, painted with uneven flowers. A note was attached. "Made this in therapy pottery class. Remembered how you always loved your morning tea. No expectations. Just wanted you to know I'm trying to become someone better. Someone who deserved a mother like you." I held the mug for a long moment, feeling its imperfect weight. Then I placed it on my kitchen shelf, not to use, but to remember. Even in victory, compassion had its place. Even in justice, hope could exist. That evening, as I sipped tea from my regular china cup, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. Betrayal had forced me to become a warrior. Victory had allowed me to remain human. The phone rang. Eleanor, checking in as she did every evening. "How are you tonight, dear?" she asked. I looked around my peaceful home, thought of the students studying on my dime, the wetlands safe from development, the art bringing joy to young hearts. I thought of David in law school, of Maria becoming a doctor, of Sarah learning pottery and therapy. "I'm exactly where I should be," I told her. And for the first time in years, I meant every word. They wanted my fortune. All they got was the door slamming behind them. But in losing them, I found something far more valuable, a purpose worth every sacrifice, a legacy worth every battle, and the peace that comes from knowing you've transformed betrayal into beauty. My money didn't die with my family relationships. It lived on in every scholarship, every preserved acre, every child who picked up a paintbrush because of our arts program. They wanted my estate, but the only thing they inherited was the echo of their own greed. And me, I inherited the world. Thank you so much for listening to Margaret's story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Your perspectives make our community richer.